Alright everyone, the other day Nancy Pelosi devolved into the think of the children bullshit, in the most literal sense, link in the description, and there are three things that when a politician starts talking about them, you gotta be really, really fucking careful, because it usually means they have ill intent. Children, animals, and God. Because these three things provoke an emotional response above all else. You can invoke the idea of safety in a general sense. Oh, think of national safety or something, you gotta be a patriot, just buckle down. When these things are used, they are almost always being used as propaganda. The idea is that you can tip some people in your favor by making them fear reprisal and making them feel like they're saying they don't like children, they don't like soft, fluffy animals, they're a puppy kicker, they hate God, or they're blasphemous or unpatriotic or something. You can appeal to patriotism more broadly as well. You provoke a response in people that's not actually reasonable and logical. Most of politics isn't anyway. It is a bunch of propaganda. It's a bunch of fucking bullshit for the most part, where you're trying to convince people, often against their own best interest, to accept something. Nancy Pelosi, though, does this constantly, like in terms of COVID. Not just her, but many other people within the Democratic Party, like, you want the children to die if you don't support whatever legislation I just authored. Here's the Think of the Children Act, and if you oppose it, then you don't think of the children. Oh, well, yeah, it's actually billions in Pentagon funding, but it's funding for the children somehow. This happened with the Patriot Act. There are sorts of mind games you can play with people with linguistics. The Patriot Act's not patriotic. Has nothing to do with patriotism. It has to do with expanding government spying and denying the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and fucking around with the country and making everything worse, and it didn't save anybody, and it was fucking pointless. But it was called the Patriot Act, so a lot of people said, oh, wow, I've got to support that. You don't even have to look at the content of it. You'll just get your readout from Fox or CNN, and people will believe that too. The same is true of things like Antifa. Antifa is a group, not an idea. It has nothing to do with anti-fascism. It doesn't have anything in common with partisan fighters back in the 30s or 40s. It's a bunch of communists who have more in common with Stalin and want totalitarianism. They're literally the book burners of society, and some of their auxiliary groups are too. But when they label themselves Antifa and say, well, we're anti-fascists, a lot of people won't look any further. Oh, okay, you're only fighting Nazis. Well, no, that's not what they're doing, but that's the label they've chosen because it helps shield them from repercussions for their actions. Clean coal is a great example. There is no clean coal. There are ways to make it kind of cleaner, but it's still a dirty fuel source. It's still a fossil fuel. It's dirtier than oil or gas, by far, certainly, or any of these others. It's not clean coal. It's just a little bit cleaner. But it was a very successful campaign using the term clean coal. It definitely helped to push that off on the populace because it's, oh, well, yeah, coal used to be dirty, but now they've got this clean coal. Well, you don't know anything about it. You never read a report on the actual emissions differentials or the pollution differential, the amount of soot that's created or anything. It's still coal. It just happens to be a little bit less lethal than it used to be. So when Pelosi says she thinks of the children all the time, okay, that's even worse than saying I should think of the children. So now you're sitting there saying that you're obsessed over the topic. So you must have real malevolence. If you're trying to even psychologically cover it up for your own guilty conscience by constantly thinking of children frolicking around as the result of your legislation, then that legislation must be really fucking shitty. And of course, Pelosi's never done anything. She's had a career spanning what? 4.5 decades or some insane total. All of the problems that she wants to address, she could have addressed for that period of time and never did. And the Democrats especially are guilty of constantly doing this time and time again. They have some grand idea about what they want to do, and then they get elected and they immediately switch and they start talking about more gun control or something. Never actually tackling a meaningful issue. Oh, we need better pandemic response. Do you actually think that if Biden's elected, they're going to do anything about that? No. They won't change a goddamn thing. Everything will remain the same. Largely because the legislation that will be offered is basically just more billions for their corporate partners or for them. For a bunch of people who will put it in a slush fund and then pay them back with it. In speaking fees or in book sales or something. Oh, Goldman Sachs can't pay me any more money this quarter, but they promised to buy 100,000 copies of my book under the table, so it's basically the same thing. And I don't have to declare it as campaign related. I can keep every cent, says Pelosi. Ha ha. It's funny how someone with her kind of salary has her kind of money. It didn't come from the taxpayers. Think it came from speaking fees at, $1,000 a plate galas where she gives a 30-minute speech to a bunch of oil executives and stuff and chuckles about poor people. Now, think of the children. Okay, so again, you've never met a war you didn't like. You're basically as warmongering as a Dick Cheney or any other Republican is. And you want me to think of the children, and so I need to support your legislation. I've been fed that bullshit by every president, including Trump at times, by every incarnation of the legislature, House, and Senate. Politicians love to do that. It's like the old trope of politicians going around kissing babies in order to try to campaign, oh, what a cute child, oh, and kiss the baby and stuff. This is just an extension of that, trying to provoke that emotional response. It's fucking horseshit. Whenever a politician says think of the children, think of something else. Think of the actual real-world impact of the legislation or the idea that they're proposing, and you'll see that it's not going to help any kids. In fact, it usually doesn't have anything to fucking do with kids. That's about all. Peace out.